1, 2, 3, 4. I gave you all I had to give, and I done the best I can. So now it's up to you to finish what I began. Yes, I will always love you, and I'll be there just for you. So in all that you do, my child, to yourself you must be true. So promise me that you will fight for what it is that you believe. No matter what you do in life, it's in the giving that you'll receive. Wherever the road may take you, those you meet along the way, promise me that you will count your blessings every day.
And a very good day or night, morning, whenever you happen to catch this. And I have to say that as I am recording this, which actually is very early in the morning or late at night, it's actually 12:12 a.m. looking at my computer. And again, I did decide I wanted to jump on here and do a podcast, do a show. I probably wanted to do one a little bit earlier than this, so all I have to say at this point, it's a good thing, I suppose, that my actual job that on a Tuesday morning, which it now is, that it's actually one of my later days as far as having to go into work. So I have to be in at 10 o'clock in the morning. So I will get still, or should get still, a respectable amount of sleep, if not maybe as much as I would ideally like or intend. But anyway, this is Jason Hawes here on American Faith Today. I suppose it is important to mention that and get that out of the way so you know who you're hearing from and just what the show is. Hopefully you do anyway, but it's always good for me to remember just who I am. And that's not a given with me every day. But good to be here. Good to have you listening as well whenever you do happen to catch this. And I'll tell you what, I've got kind of an off-the-wall working title for this show, this podcast tonight, and I think I'm going to call it, which will definitely be decided, but pretty much has been decided. I just haven't officially titled it yet, but I think it's going to be titled, Don't Go to the Circus. Why not? Well, sometimes they have elephants, sometimes they have lions or tigers, and the scariest thing of all, clowns. But no, I'm not actually talking about a real circus, which I haven't been to in years, but I am talking about the circus. Primarily I'm going to be talking about the political circus, is what I'll be getting into tonight on this podcast, or this morning, whatever time of this weird day that we're dealing with, or whatever weird time that I'm dealing with here. And so much of this is going to focus on the fallout, and not so much other people's reactions, but my reaction to the wrap-up of the Mueller investigation, as well as Attorney General Barr's interpretation of it, or summary of it, up to this point. And just kind of, again, the overall political circus that both parties get into, which hopefully I'll be able to draw out for you by the time this particular podcast is wrapped up. But I do want to touch, too, on some stories that caught my eye today, that I could probably just as easily in some cases make that a show topic, or make that kind of the central theme of, obviously not this particular podcast, but any podcast, because as always there's a lot that's going on, there's a lot that caught my eye, and again, I suppose, and again, getting into the main theme, that circus theme, and that political circus theme, if you will, and something that I certainly have been trying to touch on and hammer out and draw out on many of these recent podcasts, is just how much deception we're dealing with at this time. But there were some stories certainly that caught my eye, and boy, I'll tell you what, one of the things that certainly is catching my eye in these days is I believe that the internet and these social media companies, and certainly there's a lot of us who are very, very frustrated with Facebook and some of the other social media companies and tech giants, if you will, Facebook, Google, Twitter, you name it. And one of the things that I've said, and one of the things that I'm certainly going to try to keep an eye on, and that I would also encourage you to try to keep an eye on, is just what is going on with various governments in relation to these social media companies and tech giants. Take a look at what might be going on here in the United States with these companies and with these platforms, as well as in China and in Russia. And now, as this story comes out, in New Zealand, as we know, actually this it deals with New Zealand, but this actually would be Australia, apparently. Both of them kind of the lands down under, if you would, or if you will. But we know what recently happened in New Zealand with the mosque shootings at Christchurch, New Zealand. And we also know, as I mentioned, and no doubt you knew it or certainly could find it without hearing from me, that it is said that the shooter actually live streamed or was Facebook living his attack as he was conducting it. And this story from the New Zealand Herald, Aussie Prime Minister threatens social media companies with, quote, significant penalties. This is a story March 26th, which it is March 26th, but of course we have to keep in mind too that they are several hours ahead of us, so this was actually posted on our March 25th. So again, a current story. It's from a gentleman named Chris Keel, New Zealand Herald. He's a business writer, apparently. And he writes, tech giants will be threatened with, quote, significant penalties when they meet with Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison in Brisbane this afternoon. Representatives from Facebook, YouTube owner Google, and Twitter will meet with the Aussie Prime Minister, plus Home Affairs Minister Peter Dutton, Attorney General Christian Porter, and Communications Minister Mitch Fifield. We need to prevent social media platforms being weaponized, Morrison said ahead of the meeting. He said if social media companies failed to show they were willing immediately to make changes to prevent the use of their platforms for material like the Christchurch shooting live stream, quote, we will take action. Proposed laws, would make it a criminal offense to fail to remove the offending footage as soon as possible after it was reported or otherwise became known to the company, allow the government to declare footage of an incident filmed by a perpetrator and being hosted on a site was abhorrent violent material. It would be a crime for a social media provider not to quickly remove the material after receiving a notice to do so. There would be escalating penalties the longer it remained on the social media platform. And so there we go, and there's more to this story, but basically, once again, we have talks about fines and penalties and things of that sort. Germany has actually designated social media platforms as publishers and threatened them with fines of up to 50 million euros, which it looks like is about $80 million. Seriously? If they failed to act on hate speech. I suppose that would not necessarily be it sounds like a lot, and it is a lot, but it may not necessarily be a lot for a tech giant or a social media giant like Facebook, Google, Twitter, but it's not insignificant either. I mean, $80 million or 50 million euros is still a significant sum. But here again, we have governments, and if you've heard me, certainly I believe that these companies are in league or in partnership with governments anyway, and I think even this is just so much drama and even part of the same circus, part of the same deception. But if it's not, what you have is governments wanting to take complete control and wanting, they're either in league with these governments and they're either in compliance with these governments, and kind of as we had in this country, Mark Zuckerberg being dragged in front of Congress and being scolded and having to be reprimanded for his platforms, his company's treatment of conservatives and conservative speech. Notice that they're not doing that when it comes to Facebook's decision to try to silence or hide or bury any anti-vaccine argument or post or group. They're remarkably silent on that, but again, I would not be one bit surprised if that was all just for show, and they really weren't that upset with Facebook. They really weren't upset with Zuckerberg. They really weren't upset with censorship, but rather they want them to censor. But then again, if in fact it was a legitimate scolding of Zuckerberg and Facebook, still, what we're seeing is we're seeing governments trying to take control and trying to get Facebook, Google, Twitter to work with them, to be in compliance with them, and to do their dirty work for them, to be kind of these corporate mercenaries. Again, if Germany is willing to fine these social media platforms if they fail to act on hate speech, that is, and obviously we have our constitution, Germany has theirs. They don't necessarily obviously match up on everything, but if it were to happen here, or perhaps I could say when it happens here, same type of thing. It's the government censoring people. It's the government doing it, just doing it through companies like Facebook. And speaking of the anti-vaccine and people trying to kind of close out or keep out any anti-vaxxers, if you will, GoFundMe. This on, I believe, numerous platforms and media sources and websites, but this from slashgear.com. It was just the first one that came up when I went looking for it after I saw it on my phone earlier. GoFundMe is now banning anti-vaxxer funding campaigns to, in their mind, curb misinformation. So basically, if you want to start a GoFundMe campaign that tries to get out any information that, I'll say it, even just calls into legitimate question the safety of vaccines, the rights for parents, for individuals to continue to make their own choices, to make their own medical choices when it comes to vaccinate or not to vaccinate. GoFundMe now, the latest, along with many of these others, again, Facebook, Twitter, apparently Pinterest, all trying to do what they can to not allow anti-vaccine arguments, anti-vaccine people to really have much of a voice whatsoever. So this just continues to get pushed more and more and more. And again, I don't have a story in front of me, but obviously I'm just going to say it from a prophetic perspective, from a Christian perspective. Keep an eye on Israel. Keep an eye on all this stuff with the Golan Heights, that Trump just signing, saying that the United States recognizes Israel's sovereignty over the Golan Heights, even though they haven't been sovereign over the whole area. And they did gain a portion of it